Hello and welcome to another episode of the Magical World of G. Michael Vasey, this time featuring a visit from Greg Moffitt. He and I have never spoken, and this was the first time I'd had that pleasure. It was an all-encompassing conversation, starting with the mundane and finishing with the liminal. I hope you enjoy, and if you do enjoy this podcast, please do hit the like, share, and all those other buttons. It always helps. Thanks a lot. So my first question to Greg was, what got you started in podcasting? Let's listen to his answer. Thanks.
Okay, so for people who are not aware, it was about 2011 when I had this idea. It was actually an idea to start a blog. I'd been to one of Ian R. Crane. Some listeners, viewers might be familiar with the late Ian Crane. He ran alternative view conferences, still going under different leadership. But I'd been to one of the conferences and I came back sort of feeling quite inspired and I wanted to get involved in that sort of that community, as it were. So I had this idea to do a blog. So I did an article all about the conference, but it was then that I realized that even though I'd been a journalist for decades, I don't, like a lot of people in that trade, I don't actually like writing. I like the writing being done, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
If that doesn't sound too crazy, I don't like it. I say, what the hell did you do all those years for? It's difficult to explain. If people, you're a writer, I don't know if you feel the same sometimes. It's like, oh, just the writing sometimes can be a drag, but having it done, that sense of achievement. So I then decided to change my focus and thought, well, how do I most like to sort of ingest information? Then I thought about podcast. Simple as that. I thought I like listening to people because I can do it on the go if I'm in the car, walking around, doing some other job, cooking, DIY, you name it, you can have it on there. So, 2012, kicked off a podcast. Long story short, anyone who doesn't know, you'll find it at legalizefreedom.com. That's legalize-freedom.com, and you can spell it with an S or a Z. I bought both domains because I realized that if I didn't have the one with the Z, there'd be lots of people not able to find it.
Yes.
So it's a if people want to pop over there, even as they're listening to this, and go to the about page, that's a sort of summary of what the sort of topics that I cover in general.
Yeah, I mean, I was just there and I was looking at the topics and thinking, well, that's kind of a lot of different sort of topics. So again, what's driving the interest there? What is the passion? What's the core of what we're doing there?
Um, there's a list of topics there, sort of headlines that we're trying to sum it up. That's expanded a little bit over the years. It's basically anything that interests me. And that can be within reason, that can be quite broad.
Yeah.
But there's going to be people watching this, your audience or whatever, for some of the books you've written, for example, things that you post online, who will be, consumers of what we loosely call alternative media.
Yeah.
So, and that's again itself a very broad church. So a lot of the topics I cover fall under that rubric, or I approach them in that way. So these are just subjects in general that I've been interested in since I was as long as I can remember, really, and started to read about extensively in the 1980s when I was a teenager. So I ended up becoming a music journalist for many years because that was a desire born from a desire to communicate my enthusiasm for music to other people.
Yeah.
And the idea for doing the podcast, even though I decided to do a blog initially, but when I was researching these topics before starting up at Legalize Freedom, I was working from home. And at that point, my partner was as well. And I had a study upstairs and I'd keep coming downstairs to talk to her because she was there. I needed someone to talk to. I'd say, hey, guess what? I think I might actually worked out what the meaning of life is. And then I'd tell her about it.
Yeah.
And after a while, she said, I like hearing you talk about this stuff. She said, but that's only me. I'm hearing it. She said, why don't you record this? And so that's what I ended up doing. And because I had years of experience doing interviews, it was easy enough to slot into a format whereby it mostly consists of me talking to other people, authors, filmmakers, etc. So it's a desire to communicate information and ideas to other people.
Like I said, I've never spoken to you. I mean, I've obviously watched a few of your chit chats on your channel and everything. But why legalize freedom? Because I mean, I called mine the magical world of me, right? Because that gives me that gives me open license to go pursue anything that interests me, just in the same way that I guess you're talking about, because it's my magical world. It's the world that where I find magic. But yours is called legalize freedom. There's an underlining intent there, isn't there?
Well, yes and no. It was something that popped into my head. Um, I don't know again exactly when that happened, but I thought that it was kind of catchy, and I thought
Yeah,
it invited comment
yeah,
because people start to think, what does that mean? And
yeah.
as soon as you got them thinking about it, but it doesn't have any particularly deep meaning. It was something that just snappy, and
Right.
I didn't want to have the magical world of Greg Moffitt or anything like that, because one thing I deliberately did. I mean, you're an author, so I think it helps to have your name associated, primarily with very much at the forefront of what you're doing. Oh yeah, I know this guy. I've got one of his books, right? I've heard this guy speaking on this subject, whatever. But I didn't want to do a Joe Rogan or whatever the examples would have been prior to him coming along, where it's about the person. Because if you go and look on any podcast platform, there's nothing wrong with this at all. Again, you're doing it, but it's this the so and so show, the John Smith show, the Mary Parker show, all of this stuff. It's very, very common, and that just
Mhm.
stems from radio and TV. Down the decades, it's Johnny Carson, whatever it happens to be. Michael Aspel. You just think of TV
Yeah.
and radio personalities over the years, and I just didn't want to do that. So that's long story short. It was something that popped into my head, and of course, as you may know, certainly other people listening to this will have the experience of this. You commit to a certain brand or a certain way of doing things. It's like choosing a name for your band, or choosing a pen name. Let's say you were using a different name other than your real name. You might be, for all I know, because you thought it sounded good on paper. Once you commit to that, it can be very difficult to change. So I never wanted to change it. But
Yeah.
once I got to the point where it was like 1 year in, 2 years in, 5 years in, I did 100 shows, I did 200 shows, 300, 400. You've got something there that's recognizable.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I ever had an idea to tinker with it, I'd have to be very, very sure that was something that was necessary or worthwhile.
Understood. Yeah. Talking about naming bands, the first band I was in, when I was about 14, we spent a lot of time thinking about names, because back then I was into things like Status Quo and T-Rex, and we spent a lot of time, and in the end we decided to call ourselves Nemo, which now of course everybody will think of the fish and all that kind of stuff, but back then it was Captain Nemo and all that kind of stuff. And the reason why was just because we were a bunch of 15, 16-year-old school kids that thought it was funny that people might actually turn up to nobody in concert, you know?
Yeah, well, again, it's like these things can be life changing.
Yeah.
Something that can be. I'm not saying that was necessarily throwaway, but people make these decisions, and it can be life changing in the sense that you then become associated with your whole
Yeah.
public career can be defined by something that was just, I don't know, that you got out of a fortune cookie or a Christmas cracker or something.
But you're right, because back in the day, I'm in my day job, I mean I've got a level of expertise in a very obscure area of commodity trading, risk management, and software, and so on, and so I'm quite well known. And when I started publishing books on ghost, ghoulies, and magic, and all kinds of stuff, I didn't really want the two audiences to get a whiff of each other. And I couldn't think of a good name, so I just used my middle name, Michael, G. Michael, and Gary M. on the other side. And it worked until Google decided that I was one and the same person. But I'm kind of stuck with this double identity now that is kind of weird, you know. It's like nobody knows quite who I am. Are you Gary? Do I call you Michael?
Well, it depends really on I'd say what do your friends and family call you? The people closest to you. If you've been known as Gary throughout most of your life, then
Yeah,
I
yeah,
guess
yeah.
that's that.
But that was why I did it. And yes, you're right. I mean, I wanted to primarily I wanted to promote my books and things. And then yeah, things take a life of their own.
Well,
And
I was a professional musician for several years, and
yeah, I heard that.
I adopted a pseudonym during that time, and it's kind of shaken. It's a long time ago now. It's kind of shaken itself out of the fabric of my life, but for a while it was kind of like I was getting called by this name that it wasn't me, if you see
Yeah,
what I mean. So, but I mean,
must be
that's
weird.
the work, the arts, and work from, bands through to actors through to authors. It's littered with people who are calling themselves something other than they are.
Yeah,
I'm
absolutely.
quite impressed when I find a Hollywood actor who's actually using their real name, seems quite happy with it, and it's not, is Brad Pitt really called Brad Pitt? I think he is actually. You know what I mean? That's just his name. You know.
Yeah, you're fortunate if you have a good name like that and you're in that kind of a career. But yeah, I mean, I didn't think of trying to use a completely different name, although I did publish a couple of books under a pseudonym. And what surprised me was that I published the same book twice, once under my name, G. Michael Vasey, and another one under this other name. And guess which one sold best?
The other one probably.
Yes.
Yeah, of course.
And
Yeah.
I still to this day can't figure that out. Like, okay, this new author that nobody heard of sells 5 times the copies that me with at least a couple of, semi-hit books behind me. I don't get that. I still, to be honest, to this day, I still do not understand book sales. It's the most weird place to be because the book that you think is absolutely dead cert to be well read and interesting and well received dies a death. And the thing you slapped together because you needed to get a book out by the end of the year, that's the one that takes off. It's like I don't understand. I just don't. Sorry.
No, it's I've never published a book. I've contributed to some books, entries into encyclopedias and chapters here and there, but I have published. Well, I don't know if it's must be in the thousands by now, magazine articles over the decades. But having been involved in music for a while, that's the closest analog I can find. It would be like record sales,
Hmm.
physical media sales, and how how deliberately opaque that all is. Whether you're talking about the pre-digitally, like pre-Napster,
Yeah.
pre-internet,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's always been in one of these industries where it's almost seen as it's okay to rip people off. If you're a musician, don't expect to get paid fairly
Yeah.
unless you're Led Zeppelin and you've got
Right.
or Black Sabbath and you've got a manager who will dangle people out of 10-story windows by their ankles shouting, "Where's the fucking money?" Unless you've got one of those people on your side. But then it struck, having spoken with so many authors over the years, some of whom, like Graham Hancock, for example, who've gone on to be bestsellers, others who sell a few hundred books here and there, and they're kind of grateful for it. But
Yeah.
really, their work deserves a wider audience. But it seems to me that net publishing is another realm a bit like
Yes.
that, where,
Yeah.
of course, there's many, many reputable agents and publishers. Of course, there are, and same there is in the music biz. But it's another one of these where you'll find these regular examples of like people not being accounted to properly or
Oh yeah.
not being sent statements on time.
Exactly.
As an
Exactly.
author, as a published author, you should be getting the same as a musician gets, which is maybe quarterly, however you work it out, maybe twice a year, a statement, sales, and then at some point, in my case, within 3 months, payments should be made for that statement. But the number of times it's like, I mean, I only ever signed one record contract, but the the band I was in had an existing contract when I joined. So
Uh-huh.
although I never signed that contract, there was one record required to fulfill that contract, to terminate it.
Yeah.
So I was cut in on that in terms of money. The the two dudes, French guys, not just purely coincidental, who ran the label every single time, and to this day, made, and this is nearly 30 years ago, they've been doing it all the way. They've made the representatives for the band, whatever management it happened to be over the years, go through a legal process to extract the money, costing both sides money. So it
Right.
costs these guys, rather than just pay, they've done that, and that's been like all the way. So for someone who had a limited involvement, I still managed to get caught up in the dirty side of it.
Yeah, no, I think on the book side, that's why I self-publish mostly because the few times I've been published by somebody else, I see very little return. And after the first 2 or 3 statements, they stop sending them, and you have to chase them. I published a book with even a very I won't mention the name, but it was a business book on hedge funds with an esteemed colleague and a very reputable company based in Singapore. And they paid us an upfront $10,000 fee to write the book, 5 grand a piece, which was very nice. I got 2 or 3 statements, and as soon as the number of sales reached the point where maybe might be some additional royalties to pay over the 5 grand up front, I haven't had one since, and I've written to them twice, and it's just not worth it, you know. I may as well just do it myself. And I've got a little bit, you know. Today I posted something on Facebook as well because I put out a bunch of crappy music on self-made music and stuff, and some of it has been played, over 10,000 times. I got songs played over 10,000 times on Spotify. And, the net for that's about $26. So it's like, why would you even bother? So I think it's gotten worse for musicians, hasn't it? In terms of
Oh yeah,
how
I
you
would
get paid.
say, judging by the people who I know who have both come into the business, sort of shall we say, in the 21st century, and those who have
Yeah.
got experience going back to the 90s or even the 80s, it certainly has gotten worse from that point of view. And this is why, even now, if you go and see big bands who are established in their field, they've maybe made millions. It's not critical to their existence. They can take over. Basically, they've made their money, so they don't need to have that earning a living aspect of what they're doing.
Yeah.
Um, let's take in the metal realm, say like Iron Maiden or Metallica, bands like that. They've got their money, so even if they don't sell any more records, they're set. But it's why you'll see, no matter what scale bands are on in terms of success or how long their career has been, you go to live shows now and you're looking at extraordinary amounts of money for merchandise,
Yeah.
t-shirts and all the other stuff that
Yeah.
comes with that. I mean, just off the charts, crazy, like 50, 60 quid for a t-shirt. I'm not talking
Yeah.
about a hooded sweatshirt now, nothing fancy, just the basics. And that's because that's where the money is basically being made. I mean, even when I was touring professionally, when you go back to the mid 90s now, so you have to adjust your figures to take into account inflation. So at that point in 1996, we were being paid. Our fee was about £6,000 per show.
Yeah.
It cost approximately that to keep the show on the road. So that was paying the road crew, running the vehicles, everything that came with that, putting the show on, was costing around about 6,000. So even then, the money that we got at the end of the tour, the few thousand that we would pop up in the bank account after a few weeks was up from merchandise sales. Even then, because that was a way that you could get money in quite directly.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? So there was mostly cash sales, so the money was there. At the end of the night, you might have a few grand in a briefcase, so it was there. Whereas the record sales, even when records were still selling, it was every 3 months or whatever,
Yeah.
every 4 months that you would get a statement regarding that. So today that must be so much more acute because, as you say, digital streaming. And it's one thing to have digital sales where somebody can go and download an
Yes,
album and
absolutely.
pay for it. It's
Yeah.
another thing for the streaming. It is absolutely ridiculous, but it's right out there in the open, and you'll find musicians of all standings, veterans right through to newcomers, just saying, I've had 1 million plays on my song and I got like, $30 for it or something like that.
Yeah, it's
So
ridiculous.
yeah, exactly.
And it's kind of on the one hand, it's easier for people like me just to do things and have fun with it. So home studio, make a record, record a song, put it out. It's on Spotify, it's on Amazon. Write a book, have Amazon publish it. So on the one hand, it's gotten easier for people who are creative to indulge themselves in that creativity, but it's gotten much harder, it seems to me, to be rewarded for any of that creativity financially.
Yeah, and let's face it, if you're someone, not you personally, but if one is in a position where you're doing something creative, writing songs, writing books, whatever it happens to be, and you've got another income stream, and you're doing your creative stuff as essentially a hobby, that's fine. There's millions
Yeah.
of people who do that. But you cross a certain point where, it's a position that I'm in as well. I put so much time into the podcast and related things that I would find it, if I wasn't getting some, remuneration for it, would find it difficult to spend that amount of time, because it's just, you can't, work for nothing. And it's a weird culture we have in the 21st century where some people think that that's essentially what you should do.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with asking for some kind of compensation for work that you're doing. Things, if you're creating value, and you can see that you are, because people are consuming your materials, they're buying your books, or wanting to read them anyway, even if they're not buying them. Just like, where can I get a free PDF? That's one of the most common things when you search for
Absolutely. Yeah.
online. If I'm going looking for a book so I can buy a copy, type in the title. Your Google or whatever your favorite search engine is tries to finish the search for you to make your life easier. So you type in Lord of the Rings PDF. So that indicates that millions of people are searching for
Exactly.
free stuff.
Yeah. Now people expect a lot of stuff for free, and modern technology actually allows people to deliver stuff virtually for free. But you're right, if you don't have reasonable income, it can become pretty painful. I mean, I do track all of my expenses and revenue from the book writing, vlogging, and sometimes get paid to speak. I might do a dowsing class or whatever, and I track my other business, and trust me, there's no comparison in
No,
terms of the income, but the expenses are fairly similar.
people say to me, I've heard people say, not very many, and not for a long time, but after a few years of doing the podcast and associated work, absolutely, I'd get paid to write magazine articles, but doing the podcasting, we're not asking for anything other than, there's like a tip jar basically, which would, be a few hundred a year or something like that. Fine, very grateful for it, but it's not life-changing amounts of money, and certainly didn't reflect the work that went into it. When I then moved to a subscription model, which is very common for content creators, particularly podcasters, to do that. Here's a bit free, you pay for the rest. You get
Yeah.
something of value you can have for nothing if you want. Yeah, check that out. If you want the rest, please subscribe. Because then you're still giving something away, but you're still, you're asking then for, well, if you want the extra, please pay. When I moved across to that model, initially there was a little bit of resistance from people just saying, well, this is, you just what this information is too important to like keep from people. And I'm like, well, kind of think about what you've just said.
Yeah.
And also like, well, you'd get more money if it was donations only. And I said, look, hang on a minute. Part of the reason I'm doing this is because it doesn't work. And by the way, did you ever send me any money?
No, no, very few people donate. Having said that, those that have, many thanks, appreciated, but you're very few and far between.
Oh yeah, I mean here's the thing. The way I quantified it was when it was kind of tips only, as it were, is that most of my toiletries, so like things for skin and hair, etc., things in the bathroom, are aloe vera based, the ones that I like. They're not available in stores, so I order them online. That's fine. Like, toothpaste, you name it, it's all aloe vera based. I really like it, but it's quite expensive. So approximately, when I was doing donations only, it paid for the toiletries for the year. So I took that as a real positive. I said, the expensive toothpaste is being paid for. Thank you very much. And now I've got a subscriber base that's indicates that it was the correct decision to move to that model. So it's still, compared to the number of downloads and streams and whatnot,
Yeah.
which is quite, I'm quite happy with that. It's quite a high number. It's like 100,000 a month or whatever. But obviously, a very small number of people, relatively speaking, are actually subscribing.
Yeah.
So if the 100,000 people in a good month who listened, if they all gave me 5p, well, you do the maths.
Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me. I do Substack, and I have some subscribers there. Thank you very much. But even that, it doesn't take that much time because I'm not trying to write, I'm not trying to write magazine articles, right? I'm not writing to anybody's standards. I'm simply running a sort of daily commentary about life as I see it. So I can cover anything I want. It could be, I did one on my dog. How does my dog see the world, and why does it crap so much when it eats so little food, and all that kind of stuff. And then the next minute I can be talking about dowsing or drones in New Jersey or politics. So for me, it's a way to scratch an itch, right? And if I get rewarded for it in the process and people enjoy it, well, so much the better. But like I said to Sarah Mondiani the other day when she was talking about my novella, The Last Observer, and how she loved it, and I said, well, it really hasn't sold that well, and she was kind of couldn't understand it. But for me, after a while, it's not necessarily important that it sells thousands and thousands of copies. It's more important that I got that itch scratch. It's out there, and if people stumble across it and find it of value, then great. That's the best you can do. And I think that people like us are trying to communicate and trying to get people to think about alternative ways of looking at the world. And yeah, I mean, it'd be nice if we got paid fat salaries for it, but I would still do it even if I was doing it for free if I could, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's what I have been saying. It's, and to a large
Yeah.
extent, that's what we are doing.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting that excuse me, that there's that phenomenon that I mentioned, particularly in the alternative media scene, where it's viewed as like almost like some form of corruption to be seeking payment for something like this, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Because, well, the people who get paid for broadcasting, for example, well, they're part of the problem. They're the mega corporations and whatnot. And but yeah, I mean, it's what greases the wheel. I like to think of it in terms of resources. It's not money per se, but you have to put food on the table and a roof over your head and all that sort of stuff. So however you go about that, but money is what it developed for a reason. It's the medium, isn't it? For example,
Yeah.
if I've got chickens and I've got some eggs, and if you go out fishing and you've got some fish, well, that's fine. You might want some of my eggs, but what if I don't want your fish? Then you could give me some money
Yeah.
and buy them, as it were. So it's a curious one, but it's also I think a convenient way to to sort of to attack, particularly people in the alternative media that have achieved quite high profiles. David Icke pops into my mind simply because so many people in that sphere will know who he is. One of the things that was leveled at him was that he was doing it for the money sort of thing, which, having worked with the guy for the best part of a year, or his organization as it was then, it was very, very clear it would have been a very stupid, pointless, fruitless way to try and make money, was to do what he was doing and what he is doing. So
Yeah, I understand. So switching the topic a little bit, when you're doing what you do, what's your favorite sort of topic? What floats your boat the best? Is it like occult and esoteric stuff, or is it sci-fi? What is it?
I would say it's been an evolution over time. And if anyone was to track the different interviews that have done, the different subjects I've covered, they might see certain trends. There's a words cloud, a sort of tag cloud
Yeah, I
at
saw that.
legalizefreedom.com. And the more often I use the tags, the bigger the word appears. So I'd have to double check, but by far the biggest is consciousness.
Yeah.
So I would say that the nature of consciousness as it relates to the fundamental nature of reality, if we could ever reach that deep down or that high up to talk about fundamentals, is a kind of a red thread running through almost everything now. So there's very little that I don't approach with that kind of even as a subtext, even if it's not something that is talked about openly. So that's kind of where I'm really at, and I think it's a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of reality and who we are, what all this stuff out there is, what the world is, what the cosmos is. what life and death are, and what time is, the nature of time, fundamental misconceptions about all this, which you could sum up in a sort of as hardcore materialism.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
The sort of atheistic Richard Dawkins way of looking at the world, that science is everything. It's that that's really put us as a species in such a precarious position, really, in our, misapprehension of who we are and what all of this is.
Hmm.
And that's the source of what ails us really at the minute. So my line of thinking is that we'll come to a realization about this sooner or later. Probably for most people, it'll be when we die, that we're getting this wrong, we're understanding this wrong, and that's leading us to get it wrong. And there's no need for it, But there's just such tremendous resistance to, despite the fact that 100 years of quantum science, and it's still not integrated into society in any meaningful way.
Hmm.
Now, caveat there is that there's a lot of woo-woo associated with quantum physics and consciousness. There absolutely is. Loosely summed up in the idea that we create our own reality. So that you get up in the morning and everything that's out there as a result of some kind of subconscious perhaps process in your mind. Really, really not that simple. But we are absolutely, I say, misapprehending the nature of the material world around us. It's only a tiny little sliver of what actually is. Why do we think that with our five senses and the three dimensions, four if you include time, that we are in any position to perceive or understand everything? As I've said many times, even our pets, dogs and cats, can see more light frequencies and hear more sound frequencies at either end of the spectrum than we can. So why do we think we're somehow the perfect vehicle for, understanding the cosmos?
That's pretty much sort of where I've come to as well, because I trained as a scientist, albeit a geologist, which is not necessarily hard science, but the guy who ended up sort of overseeing what I was doing, Mike Russell, he wound up as a NASA scientist. He was professor at Strathclyde Department of Applied Geology, but he wound up as a NASA scientist. And he had a very rigorous approach, a very, deconstruction approach to science, which I found very useful and has its place. But there's a whole different side to life as well that I think maybe magical expresses it quite well, which is that how do we perceive and what's our role in that perception? And talking about creating reality, do we how do we create reality? If we do create reality, are we just observing something? Are we influencing it? Is it a shared reality? I mean, there's tons of bloody questions. And that too is something that I'm fascinated by, particularly since I started doing the dowsing, because if you've heard me talk about the dowsing work, I have begun to suspect that the dowsing rod moves because of some involuntary twitch caused by my unconscious mind already knowing something about the world that I consciously don't. So if I'm looking for a major Earth energy line, like the Templar alignment or something, or the Michael and Mary lines in the UK, I already know where they are, but I don't consciously know, and I use the dowsing rod and it reacts, but it's me that's making it move subconsciously. And at the end of the day, all the experience I've had with dowsing just make me come to the conclusion I already know I already know stuff that I have no access consciously to, and how can that be? And I think that's where channeling comes from, and I think that's where you know sort of being able to tell the future, or that kind of thing comes from. We already have access to the eternal all, but we're not conscious of it, and we don't train ourselves to become more adept at bringing that stuff through. I've also discovered, just to finish that point, that if I want to use a dowsing rod to get an answer, if I ask a question which I have no emotional involvement whatsoever in, my answer is accurate. But as soon as I have personal emotional involvement, it goes haywire. I can't do it. So, that also tells you, I think, something about divination and that kind of thing. You can't ask question, am I going to come into $1 million? Well, I want to, so I'm kind of influencing the way the stick moves. But asking a question like, can you tell me where I put my keys? Because I've lost them. I can find my keys, no problem. Just a couple of examples. So I think I'm coming to the conclusion that we already have a direct access to all the knowledge there is, but we're distracted away from that all the time. So we never actually get to practice making that an effective communication channel because the material world is always trying to distract us and move us away from being spiritual creatures, if you see what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in that context, the dowsing rod is like an extension of your body in a way,
Yeah, absolutely.
like a prosthetic. It's not really necessary, but
No, no,
it,
not,
it
not
serves
necessarily.
it serves a purpose. It's almost like a way of it's like any other device, I suppose, and I mean that in physical and non-physical terms. That magicians do this sometimes, don't they? Like stage musicians, they have props that are not necessarily necessary, but they serve a purpose. It's a focus for energy and attention. You could maybe say the same about a Ouija board you might use to conduct a séance.
Yeah,
Is the board necessary? I'd argue not. But it's a tool, and the sort of repository of information that you're talking about there. I mean, the first thing that springs to mind is like the Akashic record,
yeah,
and I've written a lot. The nature of time is something that interests me a great deal. I'll be having Steve Taylor. He's a British psychologist. I've had him on a few times. He's written some popular science books and pop psychology books, and his new one that just out is called Time Expansion Experiences. And the nub of it is one of the things I'll be discussing with him is something that I've discussed many times before is that linear time, and I know this is such a massive cliche, but linear time, past, present, and future, is a human construct, is a
yes,
mental construct that we use to
yeah,
make sense of apparently sequential events, things that I perceive as happening in the past. Before I spoke to you, I was in the store buying some milk. That apparently is in the past. The future consists of, amongst other things, the rest of this interview and what I might do with the rest of my evening. But really, it seems to be, and there's so much evidence for this coming from everywhere apart from our five senses, is that past, present, and future thing doesn't really exist in that way. That everything that has been and everything that will be coexists now, and all there ever is and ever can be is right now. And this then feeds into the idea of precognition and people foreseeing future events and whatnot. That is possible but also everything. There's a phrase I came up with that popped into my head when I was in a hypnagogic. I'm not quite sure what the preferred pronunciation of that is. State while drifting off to sleep, and your mind can be very open and very malleable. It's a very fruitful period of time to work with your mind. And the phrase that came into my head was "everything exists." And the next day I was saying, what does that mean? And what I understood it to mean is that anything that can happen, anything that can exist, does exist.
yeah,
This includes anything that we would regard as future events.
yeah,
And that in another thing I'm very interested in, loosely gets called manifestation. Its most crude expression is in books like The Secret, which I've never read, but I prefer the school that calls it New Thought. This is something that was popularized mainly in North America at the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries. And it's the idea that you can engage with the material world. You can engage mentally and psychically with the material world and have an effect. Not maybe a large effect, but you can have an effect. And this makes sense if you see mind and matter not as two different states, but as a continuum. Some experiences appear mental, some appear physical, some appear a strange combination of the two, or somewhere on that spectrum.
yeah,
And occult philosophy tells us this. It's not a case of light and darkness being opposites or love and hate. They're a spectrum. It's just how much
Absolutely.
love is there, how much hate is there, how much darkness is there, how much
Yeah.
light is
I always use the example, foolhardiness, cowardice, and bravery.
there. Mm.
It's two extremes and the balance somehow, and the balance is not static because it's just as bad to be a coward as it is to be foolhardy, but being brave is somewhere the balance between those two polar extremes, right?
Yeah.
Everything you're saying, I completely and utterly agree with. I wrote a book called The New You. It's one of my books that I wrote, and it's basically my version of
I've not heard of that one actually.
The New You, and it's now a bit old in terms of some of the examples. But for example, I talk about how to meditate. I talk about mind awake, body asleep states, and I talk about the importance of imagination, visualization. But I also bring in quantum physics to sort of give a different perspective on the observation of reality, how observation, is the cat dead or alive? Well, it depends on what the observer expects, sort of thing. And um, I use also examples like, if you think I'm talking woo-woo, if you think I'm talking weird occultic nonsense, then why do athletes pay trainers millions of dollars to help them visualize winning a race over and over and over again? What's that all about if it's not the same thing we're talking about, magic? And how does it work that you can give me a salt tablet, tell me it's something else, and it's going to have some kind of an effect, and it does. What's that called? I always never can remember the
Placebo effect.
placebo effect. The placebo effect is magic at work. You're creating a reality based on the fact that you believe something will happen. So it does.
Yeah, the placebo effect. The placebo effect is one of the single best pieces of evidence for mind
Yeah,
over matter.
yeah.
But if you speak to your average doctor about it, they'll probably say, "Well, it's just the placebo effect." Yeah, but it indicates that mind affects matter. Well,
Yes,
no, it doesn't. It's a placebo effect. No, that's
exactly.
what that is. So it's a bit like when people say, "Oh, they dismiss the idea of synchronicity and say, oh, it's just a coincidence."
Yeah.
It's like, well,
Well, you've got
that's a different name for the same thing.
that's why I talk about the magical world, because if you don't see the world as magical, then you miss all of this. It is a coincidence. It's not synchronicity. It's just something that happens. Whereas if you see the world as magical, when I walk the dog in the morning, and let's say I'm walking along and a crow comes up and looks at me, well, why did that happen? What does that mean? What impact is that going to have on my day? Um, if some animal crosses my path, or I don't know, I see something unusual, I take notice of it because it has meaning. It has magical meaning within the context of how I think reality is created around us as we pass through life. So that's what I mean by magical world. You see the world in a certain way. You see the world as a magical place. You see the world as a world of possibilities. It's not something to dissect, pull apart, and try to put back together and hope it still works. That's not the way to approach it. Um, and back to time, I absolutely agree with you on that. And in fact, in meditation, I've many times come up, and I've written about this too. I've come up with the idea that time is like a construct of the human mind to make sense of your reality, and and that basically the consciousness is like the stylus on a record going around and round and round. And then, if you take that a little bit further, it tends to suggest that actually then your life is predetermined, which causes me a lot of problems because I don't think my life is predetermined. But if you have to take that analogy further, and then you start thinking, well, life is predetermined, right? Because the record is already made, and just because I'm listening to the second chorus doesn't mean that what's after the second chorus doesn't exist already. It does. I'm just not aware of it.
Well, in terms of what I said about time and events and future, past, present, future all being concurrent, that doesn't fly in the face of the idea of free will. What it appears to be, and if people check out, I say that my interview with Steve Taylor will be coming out over a Christmas New Year period. Not exactly sure when yet because it hasn't taken place, but they can check out interviews with Mitch Horowitz on New Thought. You'll find that stuff at legalizefreedom.com. It appears to be that there are these infinite possibilities for what we see as future events. Everything from stubbing your toe through to meeting your future wife or something like that.
Yeah.
And we're kind of subconsciously usually, and this is where the idea of engaging with a process comes in, about terms of desired outcomes. We're kind of subconsciously selecting these things.
Yeah.
It's literally like the old fork in the road idea. You come to a fork in the road. There appears to be no particular difference in going left or right, but you got to choose one unless you want to go off the path. So you take one, and that leads to something else, and perhaps it cuts something else off that you'll never know about. I reflected on certain events in my life, usually involving being in certain places at certain times, and particularly meeting certain people, and thinking if I hadn't decided, there's two different, for example, here's an example, it's a fictional example, but it serves to illustrate the point. There's two different ways that I can walk home from work, which there actually are. They're roughly equidistant, and I tend to split between two of them 50-50 for the hell of it, because why not? On one particular day, what if I take just how am I going to walk home today? I'm going to go this way. I'm just feeling this. And I meet someone on the way home that changes my life forever. It would have been so easy to arbitrarily go the other way because there's no reason to do one or the other. There's absolutely no reason to do one or the other. So if we, you and other people watching this, think back to the events in your life, see if you can identify any that hinge on something potentially not quite trivial, because it doesn't turn out to be that way, but something seemingly with no meaning or import whatsoever. You might say, I'm going to go into this store and not this store. I'm going to get this train, or I'm going to wait a few minutes and get this train. Just little things like that can change your entire life forever.
When I think of things like that, I often reflect on being a younger guy and meeting, being in Nova Scotia, being driven to Halifax Airport by another PhD student that I didn't really know. And before dropping me off, because it'd been arranged for him to give me a ride from New Brunswick to Nova Scotia, he had to pick up his sister at the airport. And we went to the airport. The sister got off the plane, looked at me, I looked at her, and by the time we got to my hotel, we were already in love. Literally. I mean, it was the most amazing experience. And he said to me, he said, well, given the way things seem to be developing here, instead of going on to Sydney, why don't you spend a week with us? We're going to this place. And, well, at the time, I'm like 19. And oh, no, I wouldn't be. I'd be older than that. I'd be like 20, 22. So I'm thinking to myself, oh, but I've made a commitment to be in Sydney. I'm taking my life really seriously. I've got to get the field work done. I've got to do this. I can't adjust the schedule. So I said no, and I went to Sydney. And now I look back and I think that I missed a magical opportunity. There was a magical experience that could have been something really fundamental in my life. But I walked away because my personality at the time was very rigid and very responsible and upright. And if I was to go back and have my personality that I have now, based on what I've learned, I'm pretty sure I would have said, well, sod whoever's waiting for me in Sydney. This woman is obviously special, and I have to explore what this means. So I'm staying. Yeah. And I can think of many examples, similar type of examples, where if I look back, it's almost like I missed what could have been some really fun turnoffs, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, I think how you would regard, events, in that light is partially, I suppose, a reflection of where you or anyone, again, watching this would feel about where they are now, as it were. Because I can look back on, turns not taken or avenues only partially explored, and see how, based on what I did experience, how that could have been something wonderful. But at the end of the day, for better or worse, all of those open and closed doors and paths taken or not taken have put me where I am right now, talking to you, if you see what I
Absolutely.
mean.
Yeah, yeah,
And
I agree.
butterfly flaps its wings in the
Yeah.
woods, sort of thing. Or, when you close the fridge, how do you know the light goes out? All of that sort of stuff. Um, who knows what? I mean, that's what I meant. There's these multiple things that we're selecting from, consciously or unconsciously. And I think that's one of the things that my whole idea of making people or encouraging people to think differently about consciousness and my interest in new thought, again, to remind people what loosely gets called manifesting, is that if you engage with this, a bit like you were saying about noticing, the crow or whatever, if you
Yeah.
engage with this, you can be proactive about it, and you will begin to see things change in your life. I
Yeah.
recently reread Mitch Horowitz, say former guest on Legalize Freedom, his book, Secrets of Self-Mastery. And I read it at just the right time. I read it when it came out. I was like, yeah, it's great. Talk to Mitch about it. And then I read it recently when I kind of was obvious that it's what I needed, if you see what I mean. And
Yeah.
it was an encouragement, reinvigoration within myself to engage with the unfoldment, as it were, and to try and it can be so difficult for people, as ingrained as ideas about reality are within us and about what the world
Ah,
is, to start thinking about, well, everything that could possibly happen it is available. You think something's impossible. Nothing's impossible.
mm-mm.
But are you engaged with the process, or are you just allowing the universe, because this unfoldment will happen regardless, whether you engage with it or not. You and I are both, and everyone watching this, are having an effect on their material reality, whether you like it or not. So you can dismiss this and say, oh, it's woo, it's bullshit. I don't buy it for a second. I read The Secret and I thought it was rubbish. Why are so many people practicing those things not getting what they want? Because I don't think they believe it's possible. Not engaging with it actually. If you see what I mean. So whether you like it or not, you're having an effect on the outcomes in your life that you experience day to day and year to year. Isn't it better to get involved with that than just to let it happen?
I would say so, but I think that there's an aspect that we haven't talked about yet that's probably important, and that is the know thyself bit. Because
Mm.
when I was 19, I didn't know myself. I didn't know who I was. I still don't, but I knew myself a lot less back then. I hadn't done the work. I hadn't done the contemplation. I hadn't done the stripping away. And so I was basically acting out of habit, out of programming, parental programming, expectations of society. You don't just scrap a week of planning because you met some girl coming from an airport, Gary. I mean, that's stupid. You carry on, that's ridiculous. Well, and so what I think I've learned is that stripping away, doing the meditation, doing the work, trying to figure out who the hell you are and why you are who you are, which is very difficult and needs external help because you can't see all your faults yourself. You need somebody to bounce things off and be brutally honest, with you. But that process opens you up to the experiences that we're talking about as well, and it also allows you to probably react and respond in a different way. Because when you're raised and you're just sort of fresh out of school and stuff, you're not you. You're what your parents and your religion and your culture and your teachers made you, and you don't realize that until you get older. And so a lot of the magical work that I've done with schools and on my own have been all about who the hell am I, and where's the real me. And the real me is very difficult to find because not only are we programmed, but we put our own programs up, defense, not showing too much who we really are because we're vulnerable and we're going to get used if we're not careful. So I think that's the other side of reacting to things is you have to know thyself. You have to work on yourself, and you're never really there. But the more of that work you do, then the more you are likely to engage in a magical life, if you see what I'm saying.
Yeah, well, it's one of the, again, if you turn to the Hermetic philosophy,
Yeah.
know thyself is one of the primary
Yeah.
Admonishments, as it were, just because without that you can't really know anything.
No.
But of course, it's not encouraged. In the modern world, we see it in a sort of a fear of introspection, which manifests, in everything from at its most mundane level. You see it in people who can't sit in a room quietly without engaging in some activity. Of course, the landscape there has changed a great deal in terms of technology with the advent of smartphones.
Yeah.
But can you sit in a dentist waiting room and just not yabber? And it's fine to talk to people, it's whatever, but people just seem to need this urge to be doing, rather than being, it sort of thing. And that's all of that external busyness and noise then keeps out anything that it might arise from within, which people are very uncomfortable with. A dysfunctional way of trying to address this, you see, particularly somewhere like the USA, with the popularity of psychotherapy. People can go and lie on a psychotherapist's couch,
Yeah.
once a week or whatever for most of their adult life, and they're not really getting to the bottom of anything. At best, it might be a sounding board where they can get things off their chest. You see what I mean? So yeah, it can be like, because what if you do explore your inner existence and stuff comes up that you're kind of really not really sure I like this. What are you going to do with
Oh,
that?
well, that's going to happen. That's certain to happen, and that's why I say it's really difficult. And I think you often need help from people that you trust to give you the bitter truth, because sometimes you can't bring yourself to see yourself as you really are, if you see what I'm saying. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And I can think of a few times, not many, but a handful of times where I got handed a shit sandwich by somebody, like a truth bomb or whatever. It's like, Greg, you need to do this. You need to do that. You need to stop doing this. You need to, whatever it was,
Yeah.
at sort of little pivotal points in life that maybe at
Yeah.
the time you didn't think of as pivotal, but you then think, yeah, okay, so, I needed someone to tell me that type of thing, or I needed someone to show me that.
One of the other crazy ideas I've had from time to time is and I think I'm influenced a little bit by Anthony Peake. You know Anthony Peake?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's one of my most long-standing guests. Actually, I think
Yeah.
he might have been my fourth ever guest.
Yeah.
If we're talking about time, go and check out my interview with him on his book, The Labyrinth of Time.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I'm a bit influenced by him in the sense of playing the game, and living your life many times like Groundhog Day, and being able to kind of explore all the different paths, over eternity, I suppose. Because sometimes I have this crazy idea that where I'm at now is all those ultimate infinite possibilities of how my life could have gone. Maybe in some of those others, when I kicked the bucket because I had an accident or I died or something, my consciousness jumped into a surviving version of me in a different parallel reality. So I sometimes think, maybe I'm jumping constantly in terms of my consciousness across all of these infinite possibilities, and so that I am the eternal survivor of my own life path. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does on the face of it. I think you understand that lived experience in a way that I can't just by you telling me about that. But all I'd say is that I think that can occur in one. You can flip to another timeline and you don't realize it.
Yeah.
There may be something that marks that out. There may be something in the physical world that indicates that something has changed. What was commonly referred to since 1999 as a glitch in the matrix.
Yeah.
But it's possible that it's something you could like go to sleep and wake up in a different timeline, but with just pretty much everything as it was in the previous one, but something fundamentally has changed. There's no real reason why you would need to know that. In fact, you could argue that psychologically, there's certain realizations that are not for us in this lifetime or in this physical manifestation, because it's too much to cope with. As I think of Aldous Huxley's Doors of Perception, for example, and sometimes, I don't know if you've ever had any psychedelic experiences, any substance experiences, something like that can indicate something about a wider reality that can be very liberating and also very traumatizing to certain people. We're told that we were talking about music earlier on, that one of the founding members of Pink Floyd, Syd Barrett, went too far down that route and mentally never recovered. He saw something that he maybe shouldn't have saw, and he couldn't engage with the world as it actually was, as it was being presented to him because of what he saw. I run a movie and TV review series called Hauntology and Dystopia. It's a blog series that people can find all the links to on the website and also on YouTube. And one of the things I've got coming up quite soon is a film that I recommend to anyone. It's called Altered States. And it's a dramatization of the experiments of a guy called John C. Lilly, who went about as far as anybody I've ever read of in terms of psychic explorer, to explore the nature of the mind and reality. And what he did was he took psychedelic drugs, LSD amongst others, while in a flotation tank, like a sort of sensory deprivation. So trying to remove every vestige of the outer world in terms of like physical experience and all our five senses, strip all that away to only have the experience, the altered state of consciousness, as it were. So I kind of lost my thread in all that, but I think that there are certainly things we get glimpses of, and this can happen spontaneously. Sometimes people will have out-of-body experiences and near-death experiences that are very similar in their content. They're brief peaks beyond, as Bernardo Kastrup calls them. He's another one of my guests who I think is really on the cutting edge of exploring consciousness and the nature of reality. But they're little glimpses in the world that you and I are operating in at the minute is not really what it appears to be.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this we'll call it drone phenomenon is an aspect of that. Maybe this is the final topic, because it's caught my imagination for sure. Something weird is going on. There's a lot of I think there's some fake videos and the normal hysteria whipping up stuff to the point where it's probably overdone. I'm very concerned about some of the American military and politicians believing it's Iran or Russia or whatever. And my sort of perception is that there is some consciousness related aspect to this as well. I don't know what you think. I mean, it's very difficult to explain, but I'm thinking that it might have some relevance to how we see the world going forward.
You're going to have to clarify this a little bit. You mentioned Iran and Russia. I'm not exactly sure what you're referring to.
Oh, I'm talking about all the sightings of UAPs going on in North America,
yes,
over the bases in the UK, but also in everywhere else like South America, Russia. The Americans sometimes get very US centric and they think it's only happening in New Jersey, but it's happening globally. So it's unlikely to be the Russians. They wouldn't be doing it to themselves, I don't think. So I'm not looking for like a political adversary narrative there. I'm looking at these things and I'm listening to what people are saying, and I'm thinking very much some sort of consciousness aberration, some sort of
yes,
liminal experience going on.
definitely, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've done many shows based around discussion of UFOs, UAPs, potential existence of extraterrestrial life. And thus far, there is no evidence, I'll repeat that, no evidence whatsoever for physical craft and physical creatures of ET origin piloting those craft. There just isn't any. And if anybody says that there is, please come forward and tell me where I can see it. But one of my most recent shows is with an American guy called Keith Thompson. He's been involved in UFO research for decades. I'd urge people to check that out. It very much bears out what you're saying, that it's an interactive process. And I think that we're being shown something. I think, to sum it up quite simply, I think that the UAP phenomena, because it's a suite of different things
Yep.
that have been experienced throughout all of human history, as far as we can see,
Yep.
are there. They're basically saying, this isn't what you think it is. Here's some high strangeness.
Yeah.
It's going to force you to confront the fact that there is a wider reality.
Yeah.
David J. Moore's book, Evolutionary Metaphors, is great on this. A lot of what Jason Horsley has written about UFOs is very, very interesting as well. The bottom line being is that the reality of this, such that it is, if we can ever get any closer to understanding or really perceiving it in any more meaningful way, is so far removed from and so much more interesting than actually an Independence Day type scenario of like flying saucer on the White House lawn. That's just not what it is. And in fact, if you look back to where the term flying saucer came from, the pilot who used that phrase was misreported by the press. He did not say that they looked like saucers at all, but the press reported that the pilot said they looked like saucers. That's where that came from. So don't tell me that there isn't a psychological, a collective psychic role in all of this, that people then report that they see flying saucers, because you've been told what to expect. Basically, you used a phrase very similar to that. You see what you've told you're going to see, and this is why historical accounts of these sort of phenomena talk about chariots of fire or whatever. People are interpreting it in the best way that they can.
And it's been going on throughout history. I mean, I watched a fascinating YouTube video several months ago about a time when everybody was seeing sailing ships in the skies, dragging anchors even along the land. And it's written about, I can't remember when it was. I just vaguely remember watching these and being absolutely astonished at how an entire population seemed to be having experiences of seeing sailing ships in the sky, often dragging an anchor behind. And, the sailing ship was the ultimate vehicle for global exploration at that time. That was the end and the start of their imagination, right? Because you can't imagine what you don't know. So we think spaceships and UFOs and green and grey aliens because it's on TV and we can visualize that. They thought about sailing ships and sails across the sky. And if you look, you'll find periodically there's these sort of mass sightings of strangeness, liminal strangeness in the skies. And you have to ask yourself, what is that all about? Is it part of the evolutionary process? Is it like in the movie? Is it like the monolith? Is it the monolith? What's the word I'm looking for? The sort of general idea of the monolith that brings humanity forward is periodically people start seeing wheels within wheels, or fires in the bushes, or sailing ships or at one time in Europe, you had all those battles taking place in the skies over cities. Now we've got orbs and drones. It seems almost like, could it be like in 2001, A Space Odyssey, the monolith that is somehow moving humanity's development forward?
Oh, I think there's definitely something to that. I mentioned David Moore's book, Evolutionary Metaphors, and that's where he gets into there.
Right.
And it is very much, I think we're being shown something. It's evolve or die sort of time, as it were. And but of course, as is our wont in the modern era of scientism, we look for any way to explain these things away. And I think this is why, as exotic as it seems to some people, the physical craft and the physical aliens explanation, you can put that in scientific terms, can't you? If that turned out to be the reality, then scientists would have a lot to say about this.
Yeah.
This craft is made from a previously unknown type of metal, a previously unknown fuel. These creatures on board, previously unknown forms of biology. It's all very scientific. You can absolutely rationalize it. You can dissect the creatures. You can reverse engineer the craft. What people are actually experiencing, not only it confounds all of that, but here's the thing: it's a bit like the synchronicity, or the more you look, the more you see. You read all the UFO reports. There's so many books now of like different encounters that people have had, and there's some recurring motifs like being abducted and having medical tests done on you, or being raped and impregnated. But one of the dimensions that's not often talked about is how people feel about it, how it changes their life forever. You might think if you saw something weird in the sky that, yeah, it might well change your life forever. But I'm talking about in really radical ways, a bit like near-death experiences do for some people. They just embark on a completely different path. They're just not the same person again. And I don't feel that that would be for purely physical manifestations of high strangeness. I don't understand why it would have that depth of effect on people. Of course, if you saw something that you were previously told couldn't exist, that would be mind-boggling. But, humans throughout history have encountered things as we moved out and explored the world that would have confounded our senses. That what was the first time, humans maybe from Europe, when they first traveled to some other part of the world and saw an exotic beast that the mind couldn't conceive of. I mean, I'm reminded of that story. Here I am up here in Yorkshire, in England, and the story of, if you want the full story, you'll have to, look it up online. But at one point in Hartlepool, a port town north of here, I can't remember what period it was, but several centuries ago. I don't know what happened on board the ship, but this ship drifted into Hartlepool Harbour, and all that was on board were monkeys. I'm not sure if they were chimpanzees or what sort of monkey they were, but that's all that was on board. And the local people thought they were French people.
Yeah, I think I read this story. Yeah.
Yeah, so they hung them all. Maybe it was a time between France and England, but they hung all the monkeys as French, invaders. So they were obviously looking at creatures they'd never seen before and just thought these hairy, these hairy beasts who can't speak English, they must be the French, So, but to round that off, I just think that in the UAP phenomenon, some of these UFO encounters, what we're being confronted with is something that can shake your sense of reality and your sense of yourself to the core. And I think that has a purpose. I think we're being shown something, and evolution is definitely a word to bring into that discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, with that, I will ask you just to tell people where they can find out more about you and look at some of your videos and that kind of thing.
Of course. So as mentioned at the top of the hour, it's legalizefreedom.com, legalize-freedom.com. You can spell legalize with an S or a Z, whatever you're used to doing. I'm on YouTube and on many other podcast platforms as well. Podbean and Apple Podcasts. So you should be able to find whatever your preferred platform is, just search for Legalize Freedom. But the main website has kind of a hub for all of that. It links to everything externally. So I'd say just go there and start from that point.
Super. Thanks a lot, Greg. Appreciate it. Nice to meet you finally.
And nice to meet you, Michael, Gary, whatever you're calling yourself today.